Welcome to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I'm your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. With a little bit of an announcement and something a little different this week. There's going to be no regular episode this week in the Pius IX and the Papacy of the 19th century series. It has been a heck of a couple of weeks. I'm preparing for a new project that will be coming out soon that I will definitely announce on this feed very soon. I also had some things in the analog life that have set things back a little bit, but look for new episodes next week. With that, we'll be wrapping up the Pius IX series very soon. I would very much like to do a question and answer episode. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, please send them to me at steve@a2zhistorypage.com, and we can look through those questions and answer some of your questions and address some of your comments. So for today, instead of a regular episode, I'm going to share with you one of the bonus content episodes that are usually only available to Patreons at patreon.com/history of the papacy. I put out bonus content with some regularity. I won't say that it's on any sort of schedule, but I try and send them out as often as possible. And as a matter of fact, I will have a brand new episode exclusive to Patreon probably as early as this weekend. So definitely keep that in mind, because if you become a patron, there's so many different benefits to you, and you're doing a great thing of helping me keep this whole project going. Another thing that you can do is tell a friend, tell a couple of friends who are into history, into podcasting, into theology, the church, that the History of the Papacy exists. Your word of mouth goes way further than any algorithms and anything like that on YouTube or Google. Just telling a friend, sharing it on your social media goes a long, long way. So with that, today on this bonus episode of the History of the Papacy in 10 minutes, since in this 19th century papacy series, we've been talking so much about the longest papacy in history of Pius IX, here's a talk about the shortest papacies in history. Some of them are very interesting, and anytime somebody dies that quickly, as soon as assuming an office, there's something to learn there. There's definitely something to talk about there. So I hope you enjoy. If you like content like that, check us out on Patreon, and I will talk to you soon. Hey, welcome back to the History of the Papacy in 10 minutes or less, or at least we try. Definitely no more than 15 minutes. Well, maybe, but I can't make any guarantees, but we'll try. Now, throughout the 20-odd centuries or so of the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church and the papacy, there haven't really been many long Roman papal reigns. I mean, really, the longest papacy, not recorded as such, but as far as I guess you might say, folklore is that it was St. Peter who reigned for 30 to 40 odd years, and scholars question that, and some scholars even question whether Peter made it to Rome. I think the preponderance of evidence says that he did, but the longest recorded papal reign was that of Pius IX, who reigned for 31 years in the middle part of the 19th century. But you look at it in the big scope of things of secular monarchs, that's not even half the length, not even close to half the length of the longest reigning sovereigns of nations. You look at Queen Elizabeth of England, she's going on almost 70 years and counting. You've got King Rama IX of Thailand, who is over 70 years in his reign, and then Louis XIV of France, who reigned for over 72 years. So really, basically, the long and short of it is secular monarchs, they often assume their titles when they're really young. I mean, some as young as in their, not even in their teens yet, some in their later mid-teens, even into their 20s, where popes are usually elected as a capstone of their career. So they're, by definition, an older person. But anyway, so the rub for today is men become popes when they are much older, meaning that they're closer to the end of their careers and therefore their lifespans when they're elected popes. Therefore, they have shorter reigns, and sometimes those reigns can be very, very short, and that's going to be our topic of today. Now, the first thing that we really need to talk about is papal elections. Papal elections have evolved dramatically over the centuries. They used to be, by acclaim, the group of everybody would come together, bishops, priests, the laity, the aristocracy, everybody come together and kind of come up with a consensus choice. But obviously, as the years progressed, it became that the clergy were the ones who voted for the Pope. And then it became a certain special group of the clergy called the cardinals, of the highest ranking clergy. And then over the course of time, there's something evolved called the conclave process, which only the cardinals were eligible to vote, and they would be locked away in one place, and they would not be allowed to leave that one place until they elected a pope. So this became, over the course of centuries and millennia, a really highly regularized and regulated process. Nowadays, the rules are once a cardinal, because only cardinals can be elected generally, that's kind of a questionable issue, but we'll ignore that for the time being. Once a cardinal is elected pope in this conclave, he's pope. And even though whoever's been elected wasn't formally consecrated yet, he is still the pope. But that, again, was not always the case. So we're going to have a couple of caveats and when we get into our list of the shortest papal reigns. Now let's get into the top 6 shortest papal reigns. So let's start with number 6, and 6 is one of our 6-ish popes. So we'll see, this is Marcellus II, and he reigned from April 9th, 1555 to May 5th, 1555, which is just 22 short days. He had an just incredibly impressive career and background. He was a member of this 200-year-long papal bearded phase, so see the video if you need to learn more about the papal bearded phase, which you really should learn more about it. It's fascinating. Marcellus, he was a reformer throughout his entire career and really in his short papacy. He did some extreme reforms of corruption, particularly in the area of papal finances. He was against nepotism and wouldn't even let his family members near Rome so that they weren't even able physically to get involved in the nepotism train. Now, he was not in great health to begin with, and he pushed it really so very hard during his first few days of his papacy. I mean, he just put it liturgically pedal to the metal during the Holy Week ceremonies leading up to the Easter celebration. Probably keeled over from a stroke not that long afterward. Sicinius is our next pope at number 5, and he's really my controversial pope here, because I think that you could, in a lot of ways, bump Sicinius off and move Marcellus to the second up to 5th place, because Sicinius was elected pope in October of 707, but his official reign is January 15th, 708 to February 4th, 708. So that's 20-day reign, but he was elected 3 full months before that. So you could really say under modern rules that he was Pope for 3 months. Then he got his official stamp of approval because that's what he was essentially waiting for, is he needed the official stamp of approval of Constantinople or one of Constantinople's local officials, like in Ravenna, to become Pope. But it took that long to get it. We don't know much about Sicinius's background and really any of his accomplishments besides the fact that he did some minor upgrades to the walls of Rome. So you could say that he was Pope for just 20 days officially by the standards of his days, but if we were to look at that through the modern rules, he would have been Pope for 4 months. Still not super long, but that would put him way down on the list of longest or of shortest papacies, because 4 months is not a bad run for a lot of popes. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Number 4 on the list is Theodore II, and he ruled from December 897 and then died 20 days later. So it kind of tied with if we count Sicinius, it says official reign, he's tied with him. He's the first of 2 popes that were in the so-called Dark Ages of the Papacy, the Saeculum Obscurum of the Papacy. And this is a bad time for the papacy, super low. And his whole papacy was all about Formosus. And I won't give too much background about that, but you can see my Cadaver Synod episode for much more detail about Formosus. Now, that being said, Theodore was a staunch Formosan. And in his short 20 days as Pope, he completely reversed every one of Pope Stephen the 6th or the 7th, depending on how you want to number him, pronouncements and dictates on Formosus, and he returned Formosus to full honors. Theodore was a super busy man, but it was all about Formosus, and we don't know the cause of his death, but this was a really scummy low point in the papacy, and I would not be shocked if he was murdered. There's no evidence to speak to that, but the next pope after him was staunchly in the Stephen camp on the Stephen Formosus divide, so you can connect a lot of dots there. I'll be charitable and say that the evidence to support this point that he was murdered is pure conjecture and speculation, but it would not be outside of the realm of possibilities. Now we move up a couple of centuries to our next shortest pope. At number 3 is Celestine IV, and he was pope from October 25th, 1241 to November 10th in 1241. So 16 days, just a little over 2 weeks. He's another one. He may or may not have been consecrated, but I'm going to count him anyways. He had a long, boring career and all, but it was, he hit a lot of the very important administrative positions that look awesome on a papal curriculum vitae. He participated in the very first conclave that was completely locked up. The emperor at the time, Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire, actually had these cardinals physically locked away, and it took 60 days to elect Celestine as pope, and it was not wonderful conditions for these cardinals. And it was really all about the internal politics of the city of Rome between the Orsinis and the Colonnas, and then put on kind of a layer on top of that of Holy Roman Empire politics with Frederick II. Celestine became sick just 2 days after his election, and he was dead within 2 weeks. So he was believed to be elected because he was old already, and they really wanted a short papacy to the cardinals wanted to get this whole conclave of being locked up behind them, and then they could have another conclave and have a proper one where they elected the person that they wanted under less duress, and they kind of got their way because within a couple of weeks they were able to have another conclave. Next is Boniface VI, whose papal reign was just at some undetermined dates inside of April 896. And he's another one of these Dark Age popes, just bad stuff. He was the very next pope after the Stephen of the Cadaver Synod, and the details in the background of everything was murky here. It was really a murky age, dark age. He was called unsavory, and he had a scandalous background. He was reduced from the clerical state twice, meaning he was made a priest, defrocked, refrocked, and then defrocked again. So when he was elected pope, he wasn't even in the clerical state at that point. He was not a priest, but he was elevated by the crowd, and that happened a lot. There was a riot, and they elected Boniface to be the pope, even though he was defrocked at that times. Canons would come around to get rid of these kinds of abuses, and one way or the other, he died of gout just 15 days after his election, and he must have just been in terrible physical condition, visibly so. If he's completely, in gout, how or why the crowd would have picked him is anybody's guess. Our last and shortest papal reign for today is Urban VII, and he was pope from September 15th to the 27th in 1590, in 12 short days, 12 days, and that's it. He had an absolutely perfect resume to be pope. He held all the most important positions you could imagine. He was a top advisor to popes. He participated in the famous Council of Trent. He was the governor of the Papal States. He was a nuncio to Spain and Venice, where he formed strong political connections with these two most powerful Catholic nations. He was about 70 years old or so definitely not a spring chicken, but not that old either. 2 days after his election, he contracted malaria, and 10 days later, he was dead. He wanted to leave Rome almost as soon as he was elected, but he wasn't allowed to, probably because he knew it was malarial season, but he didn't have time to be coronated or consecrated as pope. Under modern rules, he was still considered pope because he was properly elected. So you take that, I'm counting him as 12 days. You got to count him, throw him a bone. And really, he only had 2 days. If you enjoyed today's episode, thank yourself, because it was brought to you by the Patreon supporters. And if you like this episode, tell a friend, tell a couple of friends, and I will talk to you next time.